So you've read the script, whatever script you've chosen that you're going to work on. You've chosen the scene you want to work on. You've taken that scene and you've broken it down moment by moment. And as I said earlier in the seminar, you break it down by literally following the idea of the punctuation and breaking it down and just putting a slash mark so that you can identify what the moment-to-moment movement through the text is. In a moment, I'm going to put a text up on the screen for you. And this is from a play called Dinner with Friends by Donald Margulis. And just to give you a little bit of the backstory so that you know what it is that you're looking at when I go through this with you. This is a play about 4 friends, 2 couples, Karen and Gabe, and Beth and Tom. Karen and Gabe have been together for many years. They have kids. And Tom was Gabe's best friend, and he introduced Tom to Beth. And then the 4 of them, for about 12 years, became really, really close friends. What has happened in the scene just preceding the scene we're going to look at is that Beth has come to Karen and Gabe and told them that they're getting divorced because Tom has met another woman. This scene is Karen and Gabe at home, sitting down on the sofa, having a glass of wine. They're both food critics. And they are looking at this and beginning to examine their reaction to the news that Beth has just told them. So the first thing that happens, as you can see on the card, is that Karen says, Beth and Tom. Well, obviously that's triggered by what they've just experienced, by Beth having told them. So it's a reference to something that has happened earlier. Gabe says, I know. That is an immediate response to Karen having said Beth and Tom. Of all the couples we know, I know. He's repeating what he's just said and agreeing with her. Again, an immediate response, though, to what she's just said. And then there's a sudden shift. So there's a silent bridge here, in a sense, which is almost an epiphany, which is Karen says, oh God, Gabe, we introduced them. It suddenly strikes her that they have a responsibility in everything that has happened. And Gabe, again, agrees, an immediate response. God, you're right. Repeating actually the word that Karen has said. And then they sit in silence for a moment. And this is subtextual, isn't it? Because what they are doing is they are thinking internally about everything that Beth has just told them and what the implications are based on what they just said to each other. And Karen then says, what do you think of the wine? Because they're both drinking wine. And Gabe says, astringent. So they're suddenly off on a different subject. Now, you could argue, if you wanted to, and this is interpretive, that actually they are consciously avoiding the subject of Beth and Tom and want to talk about something else. But I actually think it's just triggered by a physical action of them drinking the wine, they're both food critics, and seeing what they respond to the wine. Karen says, I think so too. An immediate response to what Gabe's reaction is, which is astringent. Then there's a slight pause, and she comes back to the subject that they have just been discussing. Can you imagine what that would be like, to spend your entire adult life with someone, and it turns out that that person, the one person you completely entrusted your face to, is an imposter? Can you imagine? That last can you imagine is a reference back to the earlier thing she just said inside the same section of the text, which is can you imagine? And there's a series of moments here that she has. One follows the other, and then the last moment is a reference back to the first moment in this sequence. Gabe then says, now wait a minute. We don't know the whole story. He contradicts her at that point and says, slow down. And it's an immediate response to the intensity of her can you imagine, her last repetition of what she said at the beginning. And Karen goes, what is there to know? He was duplicitous, he cheated on her. And Gabe says, yeah, but it can't be that simple as that, Karen. You know that. It never is. Karen then says, that snake. That snake is not triggered by the yeah, but it can't be as simple as that, Karen. You know that it never is. That snake is a response to what she just said earlier, which is he cheated on her. So you get the sense also that at that point, Karen isn't really listening. She's on a track. She's on a roll. And if you look at the rest of the text that I've given, which follows on this, you can trigger it yourself, work through it, moment by moment, and use this as a beginning practice text. Now, that's how you go through and trigger it. And remember, there are 4 primary types of trigger: an immediate response to something that somebody else has just said or done, an immediate response to something that you've just said or done, a reference back to an earlier moment, earlier than the immediate preceding moment that somebody has just said or done, and then a reference back to something earlier that you had said or done. Now comes the big question. How do you absorb the lines if, as I told you earlier in the seminar, you aren't really supposed to drill them? So how do you work on this? What you do is you take your iPod or your iPhone or your iPad, and this is not an advertisement for Apple, or if you're still embedded in the 20th century, a tape recorder, and you lay down the other person's lines on a tape. But you're not going to leave a gap that's so long that you can say your own lines. We're not working that way. You lay down the other person's lines, and then you leave a 4-second gap. And then you lay down their next line. And when you begin to work on the text, you work with what I call a look-up read. So you will hear what the other person says or does. If there is a physical action like he kicked her, then you actually say that, so that if that is what your character is responding to, you have the physical action and you hear what it is that they are doing. Then you're going to hit the 4-second gap, which is where your response comes. And what you do is this. You pause it. And you think, what is it that I want to say, given what the other character has just said to me? And you actually formulate the thought, formulate a sentence. Now, what's fascinating is that you won't be completely out of the ballpark because you've gone through the scene and you've triggered it, you've looked at it. But you probably won't be word perfect. You won't be exactly right. And who knows, you may be completely off. If you remember in the seminar, I said, embrace the state of not knowing. So much of the time, actors want to know. They feel they have to get off book. They feel they have to learn it. They feel they have to drill it until you know it up one side of the wall and down the other. And you're not going to work this way. And I actually want you to fall in love with the idea of not knowing exactly what it is. So you pause the tape, or you pause the iPod, and you think, what do I want to say in response to that? And you think of a sentence, and then right before you look at the text to find out how the writer wants your character to respond, you fall in love with wanting to find out how the writer expressed it. And then you look. And in your mind, you compare the difference between the way you phrased it and the way the writer wants your character to phrase it. And 2 discoveries happen in this moment. One is that probably because the writer has phrased it slightly differently than you wanted to phrase whatever the thought is, you begin to understand how your character speaks and how they express themselves in ways that are different from the way that you naturally express yourself. And the other thing that you discover is which of the words, or maybe the whole phrase, is completely different, and why it is different, and why it is the way the writer wants it to be. And you take maybe about a half a page of the text this way, and you go through it moment by moment, pausing the tape when you hear the 4-second gap, thinking what you want to say or do, and then looking. And enjoy the fact of discovering the difference. Don't get down on yourself about it. And then you go back and you work through it again, each time thinking what you want to say and then looking. what you will find by about the third time you go through it this way, and you can, by the way, space out for 15 minutes if you want to, because you're working on your own, about why one particular moment is so different in the way the writer expressed it to the way you did. But by about the third time through, you're going to get closer and closer to it being the way the writer wanted it to be. And what you'll find will happen is a really interesting thing. When you learn something mechanically, by drilling it, it's like an effort to get the words to really live inside your body. When you absorb the material by understanding why it is the way it is, when a moment you hear what the other person says on the iPod or the tape, and the moment you pause the tape, how you want to express it just comes. And it is as though it arises in your body already, fully formed. When you have a monologue, you break it down into thoughts, and then you get index cards. And you put each thought on a separate index card. And you know why you're going to say the first thing as a part of the monologue, right? You know why you're saying the first thought. And you look at it, you think what it is, you look at it, you come up and say it, then you think what you want to say next, given what you've just said, not what's on the next card, but what you want to say next, based on what you just said. And then you let that card down and you look, and you compare the difference. And then you look, you compare the difference, compare the difference, all the way through the monologue. And a monologue may have 30 cards. Now, it's a very subtle difference, but it's profound. When you look at a monologue on a page, which is your first experience of looking at it, right? What do you have? You have not a movement through time, you have a chunk of text that's staring you in the face, right? That you are going to have to grapple with. If you remove that visual image right from the get-go, pretty much, I mean, you'll have it a little bit because you're writing down the thoughts on index cards, and you put them on index cards, it means you are learning it, just as you are with this dialogue, you're learning it as a movement through time. You will find, and the thing that's scary about this is you'll go into this and you will not feel like you have the whole monologue inside you. Because if you've learnt it as a movement through time, you will remember it as a movement through time, which means that it won't be sitting here, it will be a movement through time. Okay? So that's the scary aspect of this. But that's the way to work on monologues. I said in my class last Wednesday, I said, you know how most people, when they get older, tend to narrow? They tend to become narrower. They have chosen how they're going to be in the world. And the older you get, the more fixed you tend to get in that way of being in the world. And you stop growing. The reason that for me acting is such a sane craft, an art form, is because I rarely meet actors who are in their 70s and their 80s who are still practicing their craft, who have gotten narrower. What they have gotten is wider. That's the sanity of the craft. Remember Wednesday came when I said to you, yeah, and you said, that's a good phrase. That's the sanity. It's the marketplace that's neurotic. It's not the work. It's the marketplace. It's the world in which you have to practice this art form, where there is 95% unemployment, where you get one job in every however many. That's the craziness. It's not in the work. I think the work is one of the sanest things people can do, because you're constantly, if you do it authentically, you're constantly learning about people. What greater thing is there to do than to spend your life learning about people
and how they are with each other and how they are in the world and how they interrelate to each other, and you expand your understanding of the human experience, I think that is a great thing to do with your life. And not only that, you then do one other thing, which is you get to give that understanding to others. And that's the generosity in the art form, is that you get to pass it on. Whatever your understanding is, you get to give it as a gift to other people.
Obviously, the best way to work on this is if you're in Los Angeles or you're in San Francisco, because I have a studio up there as well that's run by a man called Bobby Wineapple, and he teaches there and I teach there. If you're in either of these places or you're coming to either of these places, contact us, because we can take you through a workshop that will enable you to really work on this in detail. I really hope this has been both enjoyable for you and informative. As I said, feel free to contact me. And if there are questions that you have or thoughts or problems with this, I will do my best to answer them. So thank you for your time. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for watching this. And please, I have one other request. Share this with actor friends of yours if you thought that this was valuable. Let's move it around the web. Thank you.